Good day, everyone. My name is Derek. I'm a customer support representative with the Genetec Technical Assistance Center, or GTAC for short. I'd like to welcome you to our GTAC Tech Talk webinar on directory failover, installation, and configuration. And the first 30 to 40 minutes, I'll be showing you the installation and configuration of the two most common directory failover scenarios. After that, we've got some valuable troubleshooting tips for about another 5 minutes or so. And then we'll end off with the question period for about 15 minutes. The first thing we need to understand is what the directory service does and what happens if it goes down. The directory service is responsible for the system configuration and user authentication. It basically keeps track of what we have on the system in terms of resources and who can connect to the system. If we don't have a directory available, none of the client applications will be able to log in. We can set up a second directory for the system to fail over to, and this process is controlled by the Directory Failover Coordinator service, or DFC for short. Each server that is part of the failover system will have a Directory Failover Coordinator service running, and they're there to keep an eye on the directory services to make sure we always have one running. The DFC keeps the databases up to date on the failover directory, starts or stops the failover directory when needed, and checks the failover list to activate the next available directory in a failover situation. Now, just a quick note on how the databases are maintained on the failover directories. The primary directory keeps the current directory database, it's directory SQL, and when it's restored or synced with the failover directories, it pushes its directory database settings over to the failover directories. This means that any configuration changes that you make while the primary directory is unavailable will be overwritten and lost. In a normal day-to-day operation, there are not usually any changes made to the system configuration anyways, though. The alarm database are synced bidirectionally. So the primary alarm database will be updated with any changes from the failover alarm databases while it was unavailable. Now, before we go too far into this, I'd like to explain a few terms and tell you how our demonstration system is set up. As I previously mentioned, the service that makes sure we have a directory running is the Directory Failover Coordinator, which we commonly call the DFC. The main directory that we have running 99% of the time is called the primary directory. Our directories that are on other servers waiting to jump in if this one's not available are called the backup or failover directories. There are two types of these directories as well, global and local. A global directory is one that is on the main network and will control everything on all servers, no resource left behind. A local directory is one that is running on a remote system, so it's not part of the main network and usually connected on a wide area network or WAN. In case a DFC or Directory Failover Coordinator on a local server cannot see the primary, it will start up its own local directory. The difference here is that it will only manage the resources that are allocated to its server, not the whole network. So I'll be showing you some screenshots and configuration videos in the webinar. So I'd like to give you a brief list of the roles the various servers will be playing. The server names correspond to their IP addresses. The machine called support 16 is our primary global directory. It's the boss and runs everything almost all the time. Playing the part of the failover global directory is support 204. It's on the same network or local area network or LAN as support 16, and it's there to take over the whole show if nobody can reach support 16. And guest starring in our second scenario will be support 206, who is a local failover directory. We have that machine on a wide area network, or WAN, so if it cannot get in touch with either of the other two, it will take over running its own local resources until it can see one of the global servers again. Now, in order to get all this working, there are a few requirements we need to verify. The first thing we want to take a look at is to make sure you have the license option. You can either check this on the Genetec Technical Assistance portal in the System Configuration screen, or from the License section of the Server Admin or Config tool. So from the GTAP, what you want to look for is a part number that has Failover Directory Server. So you can see down here, these are our list of part numbers. You can expand the license from here. And you can see under the description there, we've got that. Also the part number, you can see it's usually something along the lines of OM-E-1FOD dash the 45 here, that's your version number. In the license section of the server admin or config tool, you want to look for the number of standby directories. This is the number of Directory Failover Coordinator or DFC services that are supported by the license. Okay, next we'll obviously want to make sure the network is stable between the servers. If we do a quick ping test, that should do it. So you can see right here we're pinging, I'm on 16 here, and I'm pinging support 204. See, I've got the IP address there, and it looks like we've got a pretty good connection there. The last requirement is that the directory servers are synchronized on the same time source. If the time is not synchronized between the servers, you may get some unexpected behavior and possibly even database or registry corruption. Now, if you need any help setting up a time source on the network, we have a knowledge base Article 22 available on the Genetec Technical Assistance Portal. You can do a quick search on time source and system, like I've done up here, and it should come up fairly early on the list. This is, we've got it down here, KB22. On one other quick note, if we're looking into setting this system up for a system with over 1,000 cameras, it would probably be a better idea to look into clustering. This is due to performance and database issues, mainly while you're trying to sync the directories. Okay, so once we have all the requirements met and everything is set up, we can start installing the software. From the server installation package, run the setup.exe application. When we get to the setup type, choose Custom. And we hit Next. The primary directory and all the failover directory servers must have the Directory Failover Coordinator, and a gateway. All the other services are optional with respect to using Directory Failover. Now when we get to the failover system installation screen, we want to choose if the server we're installing the software on is the primary directory server or if it's one of the failover or backup directory servers. If you choose the backup directory, you'll be prompted for the IP address or DNS name of the primary system. Now you'd use a DNS name in cases where the servers do not have a fixed IP address. In a case where the system does not have the domain name system set up, you'll have to use the IP address instead. Now in Omnicast 4.2 and up, you'll also be able to indicate if you're connecting to the directory or gateway of the primary server. This is what we're indicating down here. If you have multicast supported on your network, choose directory. Otherwise, you need to connect to the gateway. We can change this later on while running the Directory Failover Coordinator wizard, so don't worry if you're not sure at the time of installation. So now we just hit Next until we finish the installation of the services. And we're on to our first configuration, the simple scenario, and this is the one which is the most commonly used. This is applicable where we have only two servers, a primary and a failover. And multicast is supported on the network, and both servers are on a local area network with a good connection. The bandwidth on the network, it should be at least 100 megabits per second. Now first we'll take a look at the services on the primary directory server. Step one is to make sure all the required services are started. From the server admin we can see the directory, DFC, and gateway are all running. Next we want to make sure that they're all running if the server is restarted. So we want to check the Windows services and make sure the startup type is set to automatic. So we can see that over here. We can get to the Windows services by going to the Control Panel, Administrative Tools, and click on Services, or by running services.msc. Okay, now we're back to the server admin to make sure we have our services set up properly. Under the gateway service, we'll have to make sure we have the connection type set to directory. So we've got that set up there. In the directory field, we can put the local IP address, or again the DNS name, or just leave it blank to connect locally. All the other services should be using the local gateway, again by using the local IP address or DNS, or leaving the gateway field blank. So you can see we've got that set up for our archiver here, and this is on our one of our failover directories. Now, in order to avoid conflicts, we want each gateway to have its own UDP ports. So in the gateway service, under the General tab, we need to make sure our range is set from 8,000 to 9,000. Now we're going to move on to the failover directory server. The services will be set up slightly different on this one, since we never want two directories running on the same system at the same time. We can check the server admin. We should have the DFC and gateway running, but the directory should be stopped. You can see that by the red icon there. Now take a look at the Windows services, and the startup type for the directory should be set to manual. You can see we've got that there, and you can see from the status that it is stopped. This is because the DFC will control when to start and stop the directory service. Now take a look under the server admin, under the gateway service. Our connection type should be directory, and our directory field should contain the IP address of the primary server. So again, here we're using the IP address, or we could use support 16 in there as well, with the IP address 16, so that's our primary directory server. Now again, we want the other services to connect to the local gateway, so the gateway field in there should be the local IP address of the server, or again leaving it blank, same as before. And once again, to avoid conflicts, we need to make sure we need to make some changes to the gateway service. The outgoing UDP ports, that should be set from 9001 to 10,000. We need to increment that by 1,000 basically every time. The third octet in the gateway transmission address and client transmission addresses should be increased by 1. So basically here we can see that this used to be on the previous server we had 224.4.0.1, and again here it's 224.4.0.2, and we incremented that by 1. Okay, so next thing we need to check is in the Advanced tab for the gateway, and we want to change the device UDP port by increments of 1,000 as well. So in our case we changed it from 28,000 to 29,000. Now we're going to want to switch over to the config tool and make sure everything is set up there before configuring our DFC service. We want to go into the physical view of the config tool. So you can pick that from there. By default starts in the logical view. You can just hit the drop down there and go to physical view. We want to make sure that we have the DFC service running and the gateway as well. Now you can note as well that both gateways should be on the same level in the tree under the directory. So we have our directory here. You can see on the same level we've got the two gateways. This is our support 16, our main primary directory there, and this is our failover system here, the gateway for the failover server. Now we're going to take a look at the two gateways in the Connections tab. We should have MC, UDP, and TCP connections in both the to and from field for all applications. So there's the to gateway and the from gateway. If not, then the network does not have full multicast support, and a different scenario will be required in that situation. Now, one other thing to mention, don't panic if you see one of your services under the wrong gateway. Since we have multicast support, it doesn't matter which one it connects to. So in this case, we can see that our archiver on support 16 is actually listed under our gateway for support 204. Now, let's take a second to look at what we're trying to accomplish here. What we're setting up are the routes our gateways and clients will take in a best case scenario, and what they should do in the event that they cannot reach their primary services. If we look at this first diagram, this is the way things should normally be running in this scenario. In these diagrams, if you see anything with a green line, that's the normal scenario. If you see a blue line, then that's its failover path. The gateways connect to the primary directory, and the second directory is not running. The clients are trying to connect to their respective gateways as well. Now let's say something happens to our directory service on the primary machine. In this case, both gateways will try to connect over to the failover or backup directory server. So we've got them two going right to the directory service there. And in the situation where there is perhaps a network issue and the gateway is not reachable on the primary, we want the clients to connect over to the gateway on the failover server. So you can see here all the clients, they're all connecting here. This is his normal connection, and the two here are in failover mode, so they're connecting over to the backup gateway here. And same thing goes for the gateway on the failover server. If it's not reachable, the clients that normally connect to that machine should be looking for the gateway on the primary server. In this case, we just have the one client that's going over to the primary gateway. Now we need to run the DFC wizard to set up the DSC service according to the plan we've outlined above. I've recorded a short video of the actual setup of the wizard, and I'll talk you through that. Okay, so from the config tool, we need to go to Tools and Configure Directory Failover. It's right down there on the list. The Directory Failover Coordinator wizard will open. The first thing we want to do is set up the list of directories to be used for the failover system, and we need to make sure we uncheck the Use Default Failover configuration. Now check both servers, and we need to make sure they're global. The list order is important. The first server is the primary, the second is the failover or backup. We also want both of them to be global directories, as I mentioned. Now we hit Next, and we're on to our gateway connections. In the current gateway drop-down list, choose the primary gateway, support 16 in our case, and then you can use the up and down arrows on the right to change the order of the list to have the primary directory first and the backup or failover directory second. The gateway should not be checked in this scenario. So we'll just move that one up, and we can see here support 204, the gateway, that's unchecked. Okay, then we go up and choose the failover gateway in the current gateway drop-down list. That's our support 204. This should be set up in the same way as the primary gateway. We want our primary directory first, and then we want our failover directory second. That's our support 204 directory. I'm just going to check that, bump that up on the list, and once again, we don't want the gateway checked. And we hit Next, and we're moving on to the client connections. Now this is where we're going to tell the client machines which gateway to connect to in the case they cannot reach their regular gateway. So in this scenario it's simple since we only have two gateways, so they will connect to the only other gateway that is available. So you can see support 16, its clients will connect over to support 204, support 204 will connect over to support 16. Click on Finish on the bottom there, and the Directory Failover Coordinator services will restart. And we've got that restarted there. Now after they come back up, it's going to start the synchronization process. You'll also notice that the primary DFC service is now at the same level as the tree and the two gateways. See, this one was previously under our support 16 gateway. That's up there right under the primary directory here. We'll go over the synchronization process after looking into the setup for the second most commonly used scenario. And there it is, our second scenario. This is a local directory scenario, and this is where we have more than two servers set up in the failover system. Now, we recommend only having two global directories. Usually, if for using this kind of setup, the local directories are a remote location where the bandwidth is limited, such as over a WAN. The two global directories are connected on a LAN. They have multicast available and have a bandwidth of 100 megabits per second or more. The bandwidth to the local directories must be at least 1.5 megabits per second or higher. One thing we might want to point out is that if you have a setup like this, you might want to consider using federation. You can speak to one of our support or sales engineers to see if this would be a better option. Now, the setup on the primary and failover global directories is the same with respect to the services that need to be running and how they are configured. same as we did before, so I'm just going to skip over that. Our main change is in the DFC wizard and the configuration of the local directories. One thing to note is that since the wide area network bandwidth is limited, we may want to increase the client connection write timeout and the client application pull timeout values in the advanced tab of the gateways. So you can see here, I've got the gateway, it's under the advanced. We recommend setting the client application pull timeout to 60 seconds and the connection write timeout to 300 seconds. You'll need to increase if you find the failover gateway often loses connection to the primary server. Now onto the local failover directories. We want to make sure the directory service is stopped and set to manual, same as on the global failover directory. So you see that there, there's no status, which means it's stopped. That's our directory, and it is set to manual. But instead of connecting to a directory, the gateway service will be connecting to the gateway of the primary global directory. So in the General Gateway Service tab, we want to set the connection type to gateway and put the IP address, or again the DNS of the primary server in here. So here we could put the IP address we've got for support 16, or I could actually put the name of the server if I have DNS set up. Again, like the global failover directory, the rest of the services must point to the local gateway either with the local IP address or again by leaving the gateway field blank. This is our archiver here in this case, so it's going to connect locally since we have nothing in there. Under the Advanced Gateway tab, we want to make the same changes to the timeout values as we did for the global directories. Again, 60 seconds for the client application pull timeout, and 300 here for the client connection write timeout. And again, to avoid conflicts in the gateways, we want to increase some of the values in the General Gateway tab for the local servers. We want to increase the outgoing UDP data by 1,000. And so here we've got it up to 10,001 to 11,000. And again, increment the third octet of the gateway transmission address and client transmission addresses by 1. So since we already used 0 and 1, we're up to 2 here. If we had, if we're setting up one more local system, that would be 3. Now in the Advanced tab, you want the device UDP port, you want to bring that up by 1,000 again for each local server. So we're up to 30,000 here. And one other thing we want to do for the local directory servers is turn off the entity and alarm replication in the DFC service. So since the bandwidth is limited on a WAN, it's better to perform a manual sync when you know that you've made configuration changes on the primary global directory. So this is where you'd uncheck that here. Now let's take a look at the physical view of the config tool, make sure everything is set up correctly. All servers must have a Directory Failover Coordinator service and gateway service running. So we've got all of those there. There's our DFCs, and here's our gateways. There's our support 16 gateway up there. The two global gateways should appear on the same level under the directory, and the remote or local failover gateway should appear under one of the global gateways. So we can see here support 206. He's our local failover directory or server, sorry, and we've got him underneath our gateway for support 16. Now, if we check our gateway connections, we should see the remote gateways connecting using UDP and TCP. So there's no multicast connection there. Now we need to run the DFC wizard. I have another short video of the configuration. Okay, and again we run the configure directory failover from the tools, and we need to configure the directory list. Uncheck the default failover configuration box, and we need to check both the directories that are on the LAN and set their type to global, and we want to check any directories that are on remote servers and change their type to local. It's important that the first server on the list is the primary global directory, second is the failover global directory, and then the local directories in any order after that. So we're going to hit Next, and we're going to be on to Step 2, configuring the gateway connections. The first gateway to configure is the primary global gateway. In the connection list below, the first one it should try to connect to is the primary global directory, and then the failover global directory. So there's our primary global directory there. And we're going to go down and pick our failover global directory. So that's support 204. Now, nothing else needs to be checked since we don't want the gateways on the local area network to try to connect to the remote gateways on the WAN. So just everything else there, we'll leave that unchecked. Now we'll select the failover global gateway from the current gateway drop-down list. That's our support 204, and we want to configure that the same way. So the first one is the primary global directory. The second one is the failover global directory. And once again, like the previous step, we'll leave everything else unchecked. Now we want to configure the failover local gateways. Those are the gateways on the remote servers or the WAN who will be failing over locally. So we'll pick our support 206 in that case. And what we want them to try to do is to reach one of the global gateways on the LAN first. And if we cannot, then we want to try to connect to their own local directory. So there we've got the gateways. We're not picking the directory this time. Support 16, support 204, those are our globals. And then we want to pick our failover global directory, which is our support 206 directory. So I'll just check that off, bump him up so he's third on the list, and then nothing else should be checked there. We hit Next, and we're on to our client connections list. First, we want to choose the primary global gateway, and we shouldn't be trying to connect to anything over the WAN. So we just want to have the failover global gateway as our connection there, and we don't want to check anything else. Then we'll pick our other global gateway, the failover global gateway, set it up the same way. We want to connect to the other global gateway, and uncheck the WAN, make sure that's not checked. And now we need to set up the client connections for the failover local gateways. Since we don't want them to connect to another gateway over the WAN, we simply uncheck all the entries. So we'll hit Finish, and as with the previous scenario, the Directory Failover Coordinators will restart, and I'll start going into our sync. Okay. There we go, we're into our synchronization. Now once the DFC services restart, the system's going to synchronize. This may take upwards of 15 minutes or more depending on the size of your system. You can click on the DFC service in the physical view to check the status of your synchronization. You'll need to hit the refresh button on the bottom of the screen. That's this guy down here, if you want to see the updated status. If it's not completed, you'll see a percentage in the replication status. So we'll see here the alarm that's finished, and the entity replication, it's at 63%. If you've disabled the replication, such as on the remote servers in scenario 2, you can do a manual sync by clicking on the manual sync button on the DFC service. So that's right down here. You can see the manual sync, and you can choose to actually do the directory database or the alarm database, depending on if you know there's only been changes to one or the other. Okay, and one way you can test your system, you basically would go over and disable the DFC and directory services on the primary server. The failover service should recognize this as a failover situation and kick in. And it's a little bit easier than unplugging your network cable in the back. Okay, so now we're on to some troubleshooting tips. If you're having some problems with your directory failover system, here's a few common issues we've seen in the support department. Just a quick note that it's strongly recommended to make a database and registry backup on all servers before making any changes to the system. So you can see here I've got, this is our GTAP, and you go under Tools and Utilities, and you'd find your Omnicast backup tool there. You can download that. and there's a document that comes with it to instruct you how to use that as well. Now, one of the first common problems we've seen is that clients do not connect to the failover directory. The first thing you want to check is that the directory service on the failover server has started. There may be a delay of about 2 minutes between when the primary directory fails and the failover directory kicks in. As you can see here, we've got manual and we've got it started here. Next, we need to make sure the synchronization process has completed successfully on the failover directory server. So we're checking the DFC here. We can see our replication status. It's active for both. We're on standby here. And we can see the last time that it was synchronized, our last update here. So we know that it's been completed recently. Now, another common cause is network connectivity. So we need to make sure you can ping the failover server from the client workstation. So I'm actually on my client machine here. And again, support 204, he's my failover server. And I'm trying to ping him here. That's his IP address. Now, as the client is trying to connect, make sure you can see it try to connect connect to the failover directory. Excuse me. So you can see here the connection being established is trying to connect to 204, which is support 204, our failover server. In case the problem is local to the failover server, you can try to connect with the client applications on the failover server itself. If you don't have them installed, you can just install them real quick and give that a shot. Another thing we can try, you can go into the server admin on the failover server, and we want to check the database for the directory service. From the database tab, you should have the database name present and be able to pull up the properties for it. That's our properties button right here. It'll bring up a window like this, and you should have your size on disk, your entity count. Basically, it just needs to populate that. You can connect to your database. Okay, and last but always a good thing to check, make sure the Windows Firewall service is stopped and disabled from the Windows Services screen. You can see here we've got it disabled. This is on a Windows 2008 server. On something like XP, you'd see Windows Firewall / Internet Connection Sharing. Now, another common problem is that the directory service is always running on the failover server. From the Windows services, check the startup type to make sure it's set to manual. Sorry, that's it right there. We've also seen cases where running the DFC wizard again helps to correct this issue. So again, just go through the previous steps that we've gone through and rerun that and see if that fixes the connection there. The DFC may actually be seeing a problem with the primary directory. We need to disable the directory on the failover server and see if the clients can log into the primary directory. It may be an actual problem with the primary directory at the time. So here, this is on our failover server, support 204, and I've disabled the directory so the clients are forced to go over to the primary. Related to that, double check the database tab for the primary directory, as with the previous troubleshooting issue. Again, that's the properties there, and we just need to make sure we can pull something up in there. Now, it's also possible that the failover server thinks it's been configured as a primary. There's a few steps to clear out the failover system on the failover server. First, since we're making changes to the registry, make sure we've done a backup. Now, on the failover server, first thing we want to do is stop the DFC service. Now we need to open regedit. We go to HKey local machine, software, Genetec, and Omnicast FOS 4. And the X is your version number there. One thing to note is if you're using a 64-bit system, after software we go to the WOW 6432 node, like you can see in the example here. Okay, so what we'd want to do once we're there, first thing you want to do is make a backup of that. We want to export it. And the next thing to do is rename the Omnicast FOS 4.x, in this case our 4.5. We want to rename that and just add like old or back, something like that, to the end of it so it's not the same name. After that, we'll restart the DFC service, and that's going to recreate that entry in the registry, but it's going to do it with just default settings. Now, one of the side effects of this is that the watchdog may have two DFC services. So you can see the one that's running, that's our current one. That's the real one, if you could say. And we just need to right-click and delete the one that's stopped or in red. Now, after that, we just need to rerun the DFC wizard and reconfigure the system. It'll probably have some of the same settings in there as before. The ones on the failover will be reset, and you can set them appropriately. Now, one of our last common issues is when the DFC status shows software broken. This is usually network related, and the problem is that the primary DFC cannot reach the failover DFC. So if the Directory Failover Coordinators cannot reach each other, if they can't communicate, then they can't keep track of which directory service needs to be up and running at the time. So what we want to do is make sure that the network connection is good between the servers and there's adequate bandwidth. And we also need to verify that port 7999 is open, and that's used for communication between the DFC services. Okay, this concludes the configuration and installation of the Directory Failover system. I'd like to thank you for your participation in this webinar, and any comments or feedback would be greatly appreciated and can be left on the GTAP forum. I want to also mention that we now have a document available with all this information on the GTAP, and that's in the tutorial section. Our next GTAC Tech Talk webinar will be held next month, and we'll be covering Omnicast and Active Directory. Hope to see you there. Okay, thank you very much, and have a good day.